It's time for me to start reassembling the shutter. I've had all the parts out and cleaned them, and where I traditionally start is with the diaphragm. So we'll start here, and the diaphragm in this case has 10 blades. They all have to be laid out carefully. They go one on top of each other until you get round to the start, and then they're interleaved. They go underneath the earlier blades. So the blades are not symmetrical. At one end of the blades the pins are closer to the centre of the blade. At one end, the other end of the blade, they're closer to the outer edge of the blade. I suspect that this will go easier if I start with my entire blades, not my chopped off blades, the ones with notches. We shall see. If the blades are distorted because they've been previously stuck together with oil, and every time the setting ring is shifted it causes the blades to get pushed from one end and not want to move, they bow up and distort. Then it causes a lot of grief trying to get these blades laid out one on top of another. Because they don't stay sitting correctly located in their sockets. Like that one, it was bouncing a bit. Right, I'm back to the start. I've got to peel back some of the first blades I put in to expose the hole in the plate to put the next blade. And here of course we've got 10 blades to deal with. Which makes it much easier to disturb the blades and much harder to get them correctly positioned. The last of the blades. Now the blades are all in position. I have to lift the earlier blades back over the later blades without displacing anything, so I'm doing that with a couple of toothpicks. And I could see there that I want my last blade to be one without a notch, because as soon as I went to shift the stuff over there it caught in the notch. Alright, so far so good. I'm not 100% sure that they remained where they should, but we'll carry on and then deal with the problems later. So this plate goes on. It goes on in one position. Well, since it's symmetrical, you could say it goes in a choice of two positions. I'm just pulling those little pins into place. That's sitting correctly. I've got that lined up. There are 3 holes in the black plate that line up with 3 holes in our case. Here, here and here. And I know that I want this ring with its mounting hole right near that point. And at that point the aperture is fully open. And we should be good to go. So I've got to lower the case into place. Give it a wriggle to make sure it's seated. I'm going to turn it over, lift my jig off, place this back over the jig, and I can just shift my retainer to line up my 3 screw holes. And then these 3 screws, which are identical, can be put into place. Let's get the first screw started. Turn the jig around so I can get to the other side of it. Put another screw in there. I'm not tightening any of these screws up. I just want to get them in place. Here's our 3rd screw. Alright, now I lift that piece of the jig off and I'm inspecting my work. I want to see that I've got a rivet in each of those positions in the retainer plate, and I do. So I'll just snug those screws down very lightly. Lighter than that. I'll turn this over. Now I'm going to move this and see if all the blades are swinging. See if I get a circular aperture and that all the blades are moving. Well, if it's egg shaped or something funny, something is wrong. That looks pretty good. Okay, I'm happy with that. So at that stage, I can tighten the 3 screws up. These are quite small screws, of course. Don't go mad doing them up, you'll only strip them out. Now those blades move smoothly. They're a bit stiff, stiffer than I would like them to be. I know I've got all the oil off them. You can see some stains on here where there was oil, and that's possibly been caused by rubbing too. That would polish those blades. I'm going to put a little bit of graphite powder into this and work it backwards and forwards and blow it all away. I want that diaphragm to move smoother than that, because I'm concerned that if the I'm not worried about stiffness in the setting ring against the case, that wouldn't be a problem. but if the blades themselves are stiff, if they don't want to slide over each other, probably due to distortion in the blades, then that could cause a problem because they might want to stick there. And then when the setting is forced, it may cause the mechanism to go very bad. Alright, I'm pretty happy with the state of that. There's no undue stiffness there now, and I can fit the setting lever in place. The setting lever goes on only one way because otherwise the pointer will be at the wrong end. The pointer's at the bottom, these two cutouts are towards the top of the shutter. Yeah, it's just a little thread of cotton there. First of all, you need to line up the hole here with the hole in the retainer plate. Drop the setting lever in place, check that the holes are aligned, that's good. Find our two screws that hold that. And I should be able to drop one of those screws in and get it started. That's good. And do the opposite one. Run that in, tighten that up. Don't over tighten those screws, they strip out quite easily. If they strip out, then you've got to rivet them in place. Sometimes you'll find cameras where they've obviously been riveted in place, not in this case. Okay, that moves smoothly. Doesn't require an undue amount of force to shift it, but it's not rattling loose. That's a good feel for the aperture. You don't want the diaphragm, you don't want your aperture settings so loose that they are easily displaced. That's our shutter case. The case is all done, ready to go back on. We can turn our attention to the mechanism plate. Just a little bit of cotton there. Just check the action of the retard gear train. That seems good. I'm just going to lubricate the action there with a bit of graphite powder. And I'll work that in. Next we want our blade actuating ring, which has all been cleaned. It's got one pin on this surface that drops in there. And the retainer plate, which has also been cleaned and only goes on one way. There are 3 screws for the retainer plate, 2 short ones. In this case there are 2 short ones and 1 longer one. Oh, that was clever. Just drop one of the short ones down into a hole in the wooden block. Let's get that back. That might be easier said than done. That's better. So you'll have taken note of where those screws went, so that the long screw goes back in the correct position. Just running that screw down lightly. This should be the long one. Right, and flip it over, check that they are in the right place. This is the long one, that's fine, it fouls nothing. The short one is over here by that flash sync post. You wouldn't want a long one there, it would interfere. And the third is over here in that channel, and again you would want a short one there, so that's good. These screws may or may not be retained with a little bit of product, probably Loctite or something of a similar nature. They weren't in this case. That moves freely, and we can put the lever in place and its retaining screw. Now normally I lubricate the pivot for the lever and the slot where it runs on the arm of that blade actuating ring with just a tiny smear of molybdenum, and that's all it needs to be. Excuse me. These are the Indian scammers who pester me all the flaming time. Right, back to business. Just told the Indian scammers what they can do with themselves. Just checking the action of this blade actuating ring. It runs nice and smooth, nice and snappy. I'm going to put a little bit of graphite powder in here and work it in. It doesn't really require anything else in the way of lubrication. I don't like to use grease or anything else in that position. It can become sticky in time or attract dust and grit. So that's all I need to do there. I'll blow all that dust out. It's all done. So I'll unhook the spring, swing the arm back out of the way. This puts the blade actuating ring in the position where the blades are fully open. You can start fitting the blades, and this is the first blade here. The first blade has an extra hole in it. And you might well ask why, because the blades are otherwise identical, but the extra hole identifies the first blade. Now these blades were in quite good order, but they were quite marked, and the marking on them was consistent with moisture damage, like condensation or something had formed on them, and there was very fine surface corrosion. And the surface corrosion often runs on surfaces like this in a spider web sort of pattern, and that's exactly what I was seeing. Those blades are all in position, and now we need to put our case on here. This goes on only one way. I've got my two screw positions here and here, and another one further across on the other side, so I know that it goes this way. So I line those 3 screw holes up, take my 3 case screws, one of them is busy trying to get away, and put these in position. I only do it up very, very lightly. If I've managed to displace one of the blades accidentally while I was fitting the case over there, I don't want a blade being trapped between one of the pivot pins on the mechanism plate and the casing, and so getting damaged. A bit of thread of cotton there from a cotton bud, I'll just get rid of that. Right, so I've only done it very lightly, and I want to check the action of the blade actuating ring and the arm, and they're moving in and out nice and smoothly. So I can do those 3 screws up. And hook the return spring in place. And if I flick the arm there, you'll see that that's very snappy in action. That's ideal. Next, get our flash contact in place. This is a plastic block. It doesn't look like a thermosetting plastic. You don't want to get solvent all over it. You could probably damage it. That just pushes down into place. It's held in with a single screw. Just do that up snug, make sure that that's sitting down flush. Now the lever here, as that comes across, you'll see it makes contact with this flash contact here. This is the moving contact, and carries it across to that fixed contact. Now the moving contact in this case is very, very close to that surface. I want to pull it up slightly so it doesn't accidentally rub. That's better. Don't want to accidentally rub on this arm, otherwise the flash would go off before it should do, which could be a major nuisance. That's all good so far. The B lever we want on here now, and that sits over here, and that's held in place with a shoulder screw. Oops, it's all going badly. My tools are slightly magnetised here, so it's disturbing the positioning. That's better. Just get that screw started. I'll run it down gently. I want to make sure that's better. It just caught underneath the shoulder on the screw, and I had to back it up to make sure that the lever was centred properly and that it moves freely. I'll just nip that screw up. Don't go mad doing that up. As I say, the shoulder and the screw will bite into the mechanism plate, effectively clamping that lever in place and it won't move freely. We have the catch here. Just a pair of tweezers trying to get away. The catch needs to go in place. Just rotating that correctly. There's a post on this catch. It drops into that hole in the mechanism plate. It wants to go in at a funny angle. Sometimes it's very awkward to get that correctly seated. It's worth taking your time to make sure it is correctly seated. If it goes in cockeyed and you do the screw up tight, you'll bend something. And that screw up, tighten it. Now the spring hooks over the B lever at this point, like that. We have the 500th of a second speed spring, and I'll put a little bit of molybdenum, a wipe of molybdenum on the inside of that. That drops over this post. And should fit down in that space there, that's correct. We have this lever, which is the return spring for the shutter release. These shutters evolved over time, so a lot of the componentry, originally its main purpose was one function, but over time it was co-opted to do something else. And so that's the case with this lever, which originally coupled to a cable release in the shutter. But obviously there's no cable release here. I'll put a smear of molybdenum paste on the shutter release lever. You can see how it couples to this lever here. This lever here catches the B lever and holds the shutter open when the shutter's set to B. This lever here is their catch that holds the shutter in the cocked position. So far so good, and there's not an awful lot more to go in. So drop this into place. Need to pull back the pallets lever on the end of the retard gear train, pull the arm back out of the way. Drop that catch over. Now where are we? We're miles away from where I want to be, I think. Hook the spring over the post. Now, that main lever is sitting up in the air instead of being pushing down into place correctly. It's better. I'll just pull this into the cocked position. You can see the catch here is now holding this back out of the way. And I want to put a little bit of molybdenum paste on that cam surface of the retard gear train. That's fine. Now I'll do the same to our speed settings cam. Run it on those cam surfaces. Thin smear around the centre where this runs on the case. And in here is where that 500th of a second speed spring is tensioned. I needed to make sure that that was lubricated. Now, can I get the speed cam in place? That seems right. The shutter cocks and fires. This is the 10th of a second position. This is the B position. This is the 25th. I'd say that sounds a bit fast to tell the truth. The 10th sounds believable. The 5th sounds, that'll be about the, not sure what that one was. I'm just going to close this up and then go to my shutter tester and test the speeds. The front plate here is just a little bit rough. Normally I wouldn't bother putting anything on here, but because the surface is a little bit rough, I'm just wiped a bit of molybdenum on there so that it tends not to create the extra friction. And I'll do up the lock. Which doesn't want to move. I might find the right tool to do that instead. Meanwhile, let's set this to a 10th. Set it to a 25th. Now that sounded reasonable. A 50th. 100th. That's a 200th there, and let's do that. A 500th. Now on these sorts of shutters you must set the 500th speed before you cock the shutter. It certainly works. Right, well I'm going to go away, lock this screw correctly with the correct screwdriver, test my speeds, and then we can go on from there.